have we got a treat for you today. Have you ever asked a million questions about love, life, and the universe? What's it all about, Alfie? What happens when you die? Who am I in another dimension? Do I have lives on other planets? Is there life out in the cosmos? Are all those mysteries to life true? Well, this man, Garnet Schulhauser, who is my guest today, has all the answers, and we're going to find out why. Stay.
You got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
G'day. Welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3 FM syndicated radio in 120 countries. And we're streaming on 8 platforms today: Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Roku. And look who's in the house again, the wonderful Garnet Schulhauser. Welcome to the show, Garnet.
Thank you for having me, Karen. I'm delighted to be back again. As I mentioned before, this is, I think, show number 8 for me.
Show number 8 for us, but for the people that are listening on the United Public Radio Network, maybe you've never heard of Garnet before. Maybe you have. I know that my little team in the inner sanctum have. We've got greetings from Shirley in Canada. Hello, Garnet, Karen. Hello to all the people in the chats. And Pat. Hi, Pat. Oh, sorry. Something went wrong there. There we go. Looking forward to hearing from Garnet and Sherry. We've got lots of Canadians today. Hi, Karen and Garnet. Looking forward to the show. So I know that you're in Canada, a fellow Canadian. And whereabouts are you? You're in Calgary, aren't you? Calgary or Victoria, Garnet?
Oh, me. I'm in Victoria. Yeah, I'm in Victoria. I lived most of my adult life in Calgary. That's where I practiced law. That's where I met Albert. But I retired to Vancouver Island and live now in Victoria.
Is that on the other side of Canada, or is that close to Calgary?
It's on the west coast, so it's not far from Vancouver.
And Calgary's on the east coast, is it?
No, Calgary's right, almost dead set in the middle of the continent there. It's east of Vancouver, west of Toronto. It's sort of in the middle of the prairies.
Yeah. So I reached out again to Garnet. As we talked about, he's been on the show 8 times. I've been doing this show for around 15, 16 years, and I've had Garnet on the show 8 times because he's one of the most fascinating people I know. He's pretty blasé about his astral travels. I have to say, you're pretty blasé about it. But I was just telling him when we were off camera that of all the people I've spoken to over the years, and I've been showcasing New World teachers on media and in events for around 25 years, I still think you're the top one. I still think that your experiences with your spirit guide is the most amazing experiences of anyone I've spoken to. You're it, Garnet.
Thanks very much. And your $10 will be in the mail.
Only 10?
Okay, 20.
No, honestly, Garnet reached out to me. I can't remember. It's over 10 years ago. Oh, I'm so blasé about it. I've written a couple of books. Maybe you'd like to interview me on your show. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Let me read your books. And I started reading the books, and it just blew my mind what was going on. So we're going to go over a little bit of Garnet's story today. But we're also going to talk about his last book, which was published in 2021, because Kristen's here. She says, hello, big hugs. Hello, Kristen, big hugs to Garnet. Because, you sent it to me. I think you sent it to me a couple of years ago, and I read it. And I forgot I read it, so I reread it to prepare for today. I could reread all your books 100 times, honestly. I could reread all of them because they're so amazing. But let me just tell people that don't know who you are a little bit about you. Garnet Schulhauser, Garnet Michael Schulhauser, used to be a lawyer who practiced corporate law for over 30 years with 2 blue chip law firms in Calgary until he retired in 2008 after his spirit guide Albert, called himself Albert, gave Garnet a new mission on Earth. And the mission was to fly him across the cosmos in his astral body and show him all sorts of things to share with humanity, to sort of open the veil, if you like, and share with us what goes on across the cosmos. It's amazing. He's published 5 books in the spiritual metaphysical genre: Dancing on a Stamp, which was the first one with Albert, which it wasn't an astral adventure. It was just Albert talking to you and you writing down, right? Dancing on a Stamp, talking to you because you had questions and Albert was answering your questions. Dancing Forever in Spirit, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, Dance of Eternal Rapture, and the last one, Dancing with Angels in Heaven. Let me just pop this image up there, the books there. There we go. So I want to discuss the last book because I've just read it, but we can go over some of the things in the other books as well. But for people who don't know your story, I've told it many times, both on the shows with you and on other shows, because I talk about you incessantly on other shows, how Albert introduced himself to you. And I know you've said this story like at least 200 times, but we'll just go over it briefly for people who don't know.
Right. Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I was a corporate lawyer in Calgary, and I was a typical corporate lawyer. I was a stuffed shirt, button-down corporate lawyer. I was arrogant and condescending, and I thought that the only mission for me in life was to acquire material goods and enjoy the good life. So that was me. So then one day, fateful day in May of 2007, I was walking down the street, and all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, a homeless man just jumped in front of me and stopped me in my tracks. Now, I came across homeless people on the street before. They were usually panhandling for money, and I'd usually just walk around and ignore them. Or worse, sometimes I would say to myself, as I'm passing by them, I would say, why don't you get a job like the rest of us, you bum, and quit sleeping on the streets? Anyway, I didn't say that to this guy because he was different. He had these amazing, dazzling, sparkling blue eyes that shone like 2 little blue stars. And his gaze was sending me, I can only describe it as like a wave of pure, unconditional love that was infusing my whole body with an amazing sense of peace and security and well-being. I'd never felt like this before. So there I was, like a deer caught in the headlights. I was in a time warp because I had no idea how long I was standing there, but I didn't care. I could have stood there forever in the gaze of this homeless man. And he really was like a typical homeless man. He had stringy hair, scraggly beard, dirty slept-in clothes. So he really fit the part precisely. But anyway, so I was standing there like, as I said, like a deer caught in the headlights. He suddenly broke the spell by saying to me, "Why are you here?" And then he disappeared into a nearby store. So when I finally collected my wits, I decided I had to go into the store to find him, see who he was and why did he stop me. So I went into this store, had only one entrance and exit. I went, looked throughout the store. He was not there anywhere to be seen. So I went back out in the street and I walked up and down for several blocks hoping to spot him, but he had disappeared into thin air. So I walked back to my office and I resolved that night that I had to go and try to find this guy the next day. So I went back to the same street, same time of day, hoping to find him. And I walked up and down for 15, 20 minutes. I was about to give up when I spotted him sitting all alone on a bench. So I walked up to him and I said, "Who are you? And why did you stop me the other day?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a soul just like you. I'm here to answer your questions and help you on your journey." So then my skeptical lawyer brain kicked in. I mean, once you're a lawyer, you're always a lawyer. So I said to him, "Why do you think you could help me? Because you can't even help yourself. It looks like you've been sleeping on the street for weeks and you smell like a dead fish." Well, he just gave me a big grin and he said, "Looks can be deceiving because you look like you're a very successful corporate lawyer with everything under control, but we both know that's just a facade." He said, "You know what? Why don't you turn around and go back to your office and see if you can find all those big life questions you've been asking yourself and searching for on your computer. See if those emails from your clients will have the answers you've been searching for." And of course, I knew that wasn't going to happen. So luckily, my intuition was screaming at me to say, you've got to sit down and talk to this man. You have nothing to lose, half an hour of your day, but you need to find out more about him because he's a very unusual kind of guy. So I sat down on the bench and we began a dialogue that went off and on for several months. And he told me early on that his name was Albert, and he was one of my spirit guides in disguise. So anyway, we had this Q&A where I would ask him questions and he would answer them. The first 3 times he came into my life, he manifested as the homeless man. And he was real. I could touch him. I could see him. I touched him on the shoulder, his arm. He was solid flesh, according to me. Albert later told me that I was the only one who could see him. And so if somebody had been walking by the bench that day when I was first talking to Albert, they would have seen me sitting on the bench, apparently talking to myself because they couldn't see him. So the first 3 times he showed up in physical form. And then after that, he was just a voice in my head and we communicated by telepathy. So for most of the dialogue I had with him, it was just a Q&A by telepathy. And he surprised me by saying to me early on, guess what? I'm not just here to satisfy your curiosity. I want you to write a book about what I revealed to you. So my revelations will be available to everyone. This really threw me for a loop because I had never contemplated writing a book. It was not anywhere on my radar screen. So I didn't know quite what to make of it. But he was very persuasive. And one of the things I said to him early on was, why did you show up as the homeless man? Why did you come into my life that way? He said, if I had just come out of the blue, starting talking to you as a voice in your head, you probably would have thought you're losing your mind. So this was his way of easing me into the conversation, showing up in physical form. And then when he communicated by telepathy, I could recognize his voice. And I was really quite comfortable talking to him. So that was how I first met Albert. And that led to the manuscript for my very first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And then later on, he came into my life in a slightly different manner. After I'd finished my first book, I was sound asleep in my bed. And something made me wake up. I sat up in bed, and standing in the doorway of my bedroom was this sort of ghost-like ethereal figure. And when it came closer to the bed, I could see it was Albert, the homeless man, but he was in astral form. And so I was a bit surprised, and I said to Albert, well, what brings you here, Albert? He said, I've come to take you on some astral travels on the astral plane because I want you to write about what you see and hear on all these travels. And by the way, you're not finished with one book. You're going to write 3 or 4 more, which again threw me for another loop. But I had learned by then there's no point in arguing with Albert. He's running the show. I just go along with it. So then he just literally reached out, grabbed my astral body, my hand, pulled my astral body out of my physical body. I turned around and looked, and my physical body was still sound asleep in bed. And he said, come with me. And we just floated up through the ceiling, up through the clouds, and way up to a high point above our planet. And that was the beginning of my astral adventures with him. And my last 4 books all deal with my astral adventures with Albert, what I saw, what I heard, the people I conversed with, and all the words of wisdom that Albert was able to impart to me during these travels.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Beautifully said. Yeah. I quizzed you so many times on all of this. And I think the first time I couldn't stop laughing at the idea of a conservative corporate lawyer sitting on a bench in a busy, shopping center talking to himself, people walking by. Nobody could see Albert. And there you were talking to yourself, but you didn't actually realize that no one else could see him at that point. And it's always fascinated me, and it still fascinates me, how that happens, how a spirit guide can manifest as a physical form that you can touch and smell and hear through all the physical senses, and yet nobody else can. It's amazing, isn't it? It's like amazing that this can happen.
It's quite amazing, but apparently that's something that the spirits on the spirit realm can do if they choose to. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I think it happened to me. Probably it's happened to everybody. We just don't realize that we're actually looking at a spirit or an angel. There are so many stories of people who've been in terrible accidents, and I'm thinking of Howard Storm when he was in hospital in France after his near-death experience. A doctor comes into his room and reassures him he's going to be okay and everything's going to be fine, and then walks out. And immediately after he walks out, a nurse comes in and he says, "Who was the doctor that was just in there?" And she said, "No one was in the room. No one came out of your room." Yeah. So yeah, I've heard that story from many people, that they can manifest as physical as anyone else, but yet nobody else can see them. Yes, I know. Amazing stories across the cosmos. For me, the books, the books, I don't even know where to start with the books. They confirmed a lot of suspicions that I had about life across the cosmos, but it also talks about a lot of myths. Like a lot of your books talk about a lot of myths that we have as humans, talking to, I don't know, Sasquatch and little people and mermaids and fairies and all sorts of creatures that have been put into the myth. And yet Albert took you to meet these beings. Albert seems to be very popular across the universe. When you go to meet these beings, like in the last book, these beings go, "Oh, hi, Albert. Nice to see you again."
Exactly. Yeah, he's well known.
He gets around. And I think I've asked you who Albert is, who always appears as the homeless man. Is he an angel or an archangel? But I don't think you've ever answered that, or he's ever answered that. You've asked him that.
I've asked him. He won't say. He often doesn't answer my questions. His view is, I'll answer questions where you need to know the answer, and where you don't, forget it. Like he's got an agenda and he doesn't want to waste my time. He's got all the time in the world, of course, eternity. But as a finite human, he knows I only have a certain amount of time, and he keeps on saying to me, "I'm only going to show you things and answer questions that you can write about." And I have a lot of questions for him that he doesn't answer, and he says, "I don't want to download or overload your puny human mind, so I'm going to restrict what I tell you."
Yeah, but has he ever said that anybody else is doing that same mission that you're doing? Like, of all the people I've spoken to over the years, I've never met anyone that's doing it quite like you.
He hasn't said that he has other people like me, but he has other messengers, and I don't know how he communicates with them. He won't tell me who they are or where they are, but he says he has messengers all over the world, so don't really know. It's quite possible that he uses a different method of approach for other people, and all I know is the one that he's approached me with, and that's the only one I'm familiar with.
Yeah. So where do we start with the five different books? Dancing on a Stamp was the one where he was talking to you in head, and I think that he goes over a lot of the questions you had around the church, because when he said to you, "I'm going to answer," or do you want to? Who's going to answer all those questions? Those emails aren't going to answer all those questions. The questions that you had at that stage was more about heaven and hell and religion, and wasn't it? Do you remember the questions that you asked him in Dancing on a Stamp?
Oh, sure. I mean, I had a bunch of questions. The major ones are the ones that most adults ask themselves at one point or another, which is, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? And then the big one, what happens when I die? Right. So I started off with those, and then of course his answers lead to other questions, and we keep on going from there. But yeah, those are the main questions, and when he answered them, it was just sort of rang true. It was like, okay, this makes sense, because I know I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I know what the Catholic Church taught me, what they drummed into my head as a child, heaven and hell and God makes rules and all this other stuff. And I had to believe it when I was a child. And then I sort of started to reject some of these beliefs when I was in my 20s and 30s. And by the time I met Albert, I had basically done away with a lot of that. And I was sitting there in no man's land. Okay, everyone has to have a belief system to latch onto. I didn't have one until Albert came into my life, and then there it was. It was like, okay, my questions have been answered very truthfully, and I really signed on to what Albert had told me. So it was quite an amazing experience.
Lisha has a question here. She wants to know about Sasquatch. Has Albert kept any ongoing connections with Sasquatch? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't know. Albert, as I described in my books, Albert did take me to meet a Sasquatch, and I had a conversation. Albert and I were in astral form, and the Sasquatch was in physical form, and so we had a conversation, nice conversation. I have not had any further contact, and I don't know if Albert has either, but possibly he has. But it was a very interesting experience because they do in fact exist. They're very careful to conceal themselves. They think that humans are just a barbaric, vicious race, and they don't want to have any contact with us. And so that's why they stay away from us, and they're very good at hiding themselves. And in fact, this Sasquatch said they have a kind of almost like an animal detection radar, so they can detect other animals from miles away, including humans. And so that's why humans are coming through the forest. They can just get lost, go into their caves, whatever, and disappear. So that was one of the things that they had, which makes them so elusive. They are seen sometimes, that's just by accident, and sometimes they leave footprints, but they're very careful to not have any contact. I mean, this Sasquatch says, if we were to openly contact humans, they end up putting us in a cage in a circus, which is probably what we would do, I mean, that's just how humans are. So they clearly avoid us. I haven't had any further contact and haven't really tried, but I can't really do that without Albert. And Albert's basically like, okay, you've seen that one once, you don't need to see it again. I've got other things to show you. So that's his agenda all the time.
That's the thing with your books. You're shown so much that I get that you get a sort of a snippet into that world, but that's not great detail. Like you meet someone, you ask a few questions, you write it in a chapter, and then on to the next thing, and you meet some other experience and you write about it, but there's not great detail. For me, I have like a million questions. What about this? And what about that? And what about this? But it's really just to show humanity, what exists across the cosmos. It's and then there are other people who are Sasquatch experts who communicate telepathically with them, who do go into detail about who they are and what they can do and why they're here and when they'll reveal themselves to humanity and why they haven't and all that sort of stuff. But I think with the Sasquatch, I can't remember his name. Do you remember his name, Garnet? It was a while ago.
It was a female, it was Xana.
Xana. Oh, you do. Very good. I think that she knew Albert as well. Like, hi, Albert, how are you? Albert's well known.
Yeah, he certainly is. Yeah. So, and in fact, he didn't say so, but he prearranged our meeting beforehand.
Right.
So, and with the other creatures that I've met with, so he's sort of prearranged to say, I've got somebody to introduce you to, and he's going to ask you some questions, and he's going to write a book about it, and so it was all prearranged, and so they recognized Albert, and he gets around. I mean, he's a fellow well met.
He's well known across the universe. But what's amazing to me, so he's a being who's a physical being here on our planet, who is mostly hidden to us because of our violent tendencies, but they have this understanding that they can speak to spirit guides, like no problem. So they have a higher understanding than most humans do. Like they've got that telepathic communication. People do say about the Sasquatch that they're interdimensional. They can move through dimensions and they can appear almost invisible to our physical eyes. And so they're more evolved in many ways than we are, and yet seem very primitive.
Yeah, they are more evolved for sure. But there's actually a lot of animals on our planet that are more spiritually and intellectually evolved than humans. We don't know it. We think they're just dumb animals, whales and dolphins, and they communicate telepathically. They communicate with their cousins on other planets. They do a lot of things that we can't do. We think they're just dumb animals because they don't have televisions and internet, but it's just mistaken. I mean, they're very advanced. They live very close to nature. They understand their connection to spirit, and there's so many humans who don't. So they are, in that sense, they're much more evolved than we are.
Yeah. In your latest book, Dancing with Angels in Heaven, it's like half of it is actually more like it's an orientation for souls coming to Earth, but really the information in it is more like spiritual knowledge for humans on Earth, I found. I think that it's really, like spiritual knowledge, but you talk about the different levels of the soul and how when we incarnate, it's easier to have an animal life. So if you're not used to the denser planes or the Earth experience, you'd come in as an animal first and then evolve into a human. And then now we're talking about some animals are more evolved than humans. So do you want to talk about that, Garnet? About the evolution of souls?
Exactly. It was interesting. The very first time that during my initial conversation with Albert, I posed the question to him. I said, Albert, do animals have souls? Because he'd already gone through how humans have souls. So I said, do animals have souls? He said, you need only look into the eyes of your little dog to find your answer. And he meant, of course, that yes, they do. And so he was quite clear to me, and that's why he took me to meet a number of creatures on Earth and other places, just to let me know that they are intelligent, they have feelings, emotions, and they have souls. And one of the things he said was that, a lot of people have said to me, I don't want to ever incarnate as an animal. That just scares the heck out of me. I don't want to do that. My answer, and Albert says the answer to that is that you get to choose where you incarnate. So if you don't want to incarnate as an animal, you don't have to. But he did say that a lot of souls who are new to the Earth plane, to this planet, they will try to sort of dip their toe into the water, so to speak, in a more less complex kind of life. So, an animal, for example, a rabbit doesn't have a very complex life. I mean, all they have to be concerned about is where is their next meal and how do I avoid getting eaten by a fox or an eagle. Whereas with humans, well, we have to worry about having jobs, getting educated, saving for retirement, putting our kids through school, and all the other stuff. So human life is much more complicated. So he said that for some souls, they will start off as an animal and then gradually move on up to become, to incarnate as a human, which makes sense. But not everyone does that. He says some souls will just jump right into the deep end and say, okay, I'm going to incarnate as a human. And for some of them, it works out fine. For others, it can be very distressful. So it's really, it's really up to the soul, and the soul has the absolute ultimate decision about where they incarnate into which physical entity. So no one forces them, no one directs them to go there. They're not caught, by the universe in some sort of a wheel where you have to keep on coming back. Some of the Eastern religions used to think that they believe in reincarnation, but they said that, if you were bad in this life, in your next life, you'd be forced to incarnate as a cockroach. And if you're good, some other, better life, that was sort of a forced reincarnation depending on how you lived your life. Albert says totally wrong. No matter how bad of a dude you were in a life, the next life you can freely choose where you want to go, or you can just decide, okay, the heck with planet Earth. I'm not going to incarnate there. It's an awful place. I'm going to incarnate in a planet in the Palladian constellation, for example, or anywhere else in the universe, entirely up to the soul. And they can just say goodbye to planet Earth, or they can say, okay, well, I'm gonna beat this. I'm gonna go back in another incarnation on Earth and see if I can do better than I did the previous life. So it's really for some souls, it's a moral imperative to try to do better the next time and not leave Earth not leave Earth with any unfinished karma, any negative karma left on the table. So it's really up to every soul, which is really quite nice, because that, to me, that just gives us the free choice. So we're not forced into anything. And so that was really very enlightening to me.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree. This is exactly what my guides have said to me too. There's a lot of information out there on the internet of people talking about prison planet. This is a prison planet and souls get trapped, and you get trapped in the wheel of karma and you can't get off. And then there are teachers out there that tell you, I'm going to show you how to get off the wheel of karma so you never have to come back. And when I listen to this stuff, I'm just like, this is so distorted. I mean, this is infinite intelligence. We can't get trapped in a wheel of karma. If you want to create that reality, you can create that reality if you choose, but it's not how it happens. And I think that they go over that in the orientation, which is in the latest book. At the orientation, you go over that about how we're free to choose. Like, even if you were a really nasty person in a life, you don't have to come back and be punished for it. You don't even have to come back at all. But a soul who is wanting to return to love and comes into a life and turns out to be a big asshole or a dickhead, and then dies and goes, I know I can be nice next time. I'm going to give myself the challenge to try and be nice next time. Will elect to come back rather than being forced to come back, because it's a challenge for the soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but souls. So many people have told me that if I have the freedom to not come back to Earth after I pass on, then there's no way I'm coming back to this hellhole. And I say, when you're on the spirit side, you'll see things much differently, different perspective, and you won't have the same goal of never coming back. You'll probably just look at it and say, okay, well, so I kind of screwed up in that life. I did some good things, I did some bad things. I can go back and try to do better because I still have a lot of things to learn, to accumulate knowledge and evolve as a soul. So much different perspective. But if it makes people feel better, you can say to them, yes, if you don't want to come back to this hellhole, you can choose to do that.
Yeah. But I know that with many channelers, when people come to channelers, and my guides say the same thing with, I want to get out of this prison planet and I'm never coming back. They always say, well, you'll make that decision from a different perspective, not the perspective that you're in now, but when you're on the spirit side or a more enlightened perspective. Mm-hmm. And talking about coming back as animals, in the sort of evolution of the soul, the same is true too for people that have maybe been on the earth plane and cracked the human experience, but they want to come back to the earth experience and have an easier life, even though they're evolved souls. And they can come back into an animal soul to be like a spirit, like a guide for somebody, mm-hmm. like a dog or a cat. You could be a guide. So they can be quite advanced souls in animal form, right? So the same is true for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can choose to come back as an animal, even though you've been a human. It's entirely a free choice.
Yeah.
Most people don't, but a lot of souls can do that. I mean, the advanced souls, for most of us, we come here to learn things, face challenges, learn lessons. So we need to grow and evolve as a soul. But there's some very advanced souls who come to planet Earth just to help other souls on their journey. They don't need to learn anything. They've learned everything. They basically graduated from planet Earth, and they're coming to help other people. So there are a number of those people, and some people say, well, how is it? It's very tragic. How does it work when a 5-year-old girl dies in a car accident? And why would that soul bother to come for such a short lifetime? Maybe they were there to try to help their parents work through losing a child at a young age, so wow. there's a reason for everything, and so you can't just judge when somebody dies at an early age to say, well, that's a shame, what happened there, something went wrong. Not necessarily, it could be an advanced soul who decided to become the child.
Yes. Actually, well, that's saying that. Vladdy's got a great question here. We're going to get to your question in a minute, Vladdy, because I want to ask it. But that when I put together the book Awakened by Death, which is 12 stories of people having a spiritual awakening through the death experience, I asked Garnet, there was a chapter in, I can't remember which book, exactly about that, about a young girl who had died, a 5-year-old. She died brutally, and the mother was distressed. Anyway, do you want to share that story, or shall I go into it a little bit?
Yeah, no, it was. I was on the spirit side with Albert, and he introduced me to the soul of a young girl. This young girl had been living with her parents, was very happy, and she was at a park one day with her mother, and she was trying to catch butterflies, and her mother got distracted by a text message from a coworker, and when her mother looked up, her daughter was gone, and somebody had snatched her, kidnapped her, assaulted her, and basically killed her. So the soul of this little girl was on the spirit side, and Albert let me sit in on a session where she was contacted through a medium. She connected with her parents. So her parents were back on Earth through the medium. They connected with her, and they had a conversation. It was very, very enlightening. The little soul said, don't worry about me, Mom and Dad. I'm very happy. I'm well looked after. I'm here with Grandma and Grandpa. And above all, do not continue to blame yourself for what happened. You don't need my forgiveness. There's nothing to forgive. I'm doing very well, and you need to get on with your life. So it was really quite enlightening, because I got to watch how it works when a medium contacts a spirit on the spirit side and relays their messages to people back on Earth. And so it was really, really quite interesting, quite neat, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing a psychic message delivered from that perspective, from the spirit side rather than from the earth side.
Yes.
But you know what got me? Because they're amazing. As I say, your books blow me away. Amazing stories in all the books. But what really got me was it spoke to the topic of our book, because the parents had a spiritual awakening through the death of their daughter. and she said something quite profound to them about why they chose to have that experience. Do you remember what she said to them?
Actually, I don't. Sorry.
I don't remember verbatim either. I was hoping you would, but it was something along the lines of.
I have trouble remembering what I did last week. I mean, sorry, I didn't reread that chapter, so I don't remember. With me, it's like the guy said. Somebody said, "Not only is my short-term memory bad, but so is my short-term memory."
Yeah, it was something like. We elected to have this experience. So that young girl, that soul of that young girl was an advanced soul that didn't need to incarnate on the earth side, but came in to play the role of the daughter who dies, because the two of you wanted to understand commitment and commitment in a marriage through tragedy. And so we set all this up before we came so that you could understand commitment, and also for their spiritual awakening, so that you would reach out and understand who you are beyond your physical form, and understand that we are eternal souls who live on. Like, there was a whole lot of messages in that experience which directly spoke to the topic of the book, Awakened by Death. And because I think that the young parents were really skeptical about anything psychic or spiritual. And when the tragic death of their daughter happens and they're reaching for some sort of hope or some sort of light in a dark tunnel, they found it through letting go of their skeptical thoughts and reaching out to a psychic, right? You don't remember that?
An interesting story, and it was really nice to have, as you said, the perspective from the spirit side, from the soul side, or a mediumship reading. So it was really quite interesting. And her parents went away after that session feeling much better about things, knowing your daughter was safe and happy. And they can get on with their lives, because all too often parents, we lose a young child, the grief stays with them for a very, very long time, often causes a divorce among mother and father. So anyway, this little girl did not want that to happen, and thank you for remembering what I wrote.
That's okay. Well, I put it in the book, so I remember. But and I think that just knowing that it was arranged because the mother was holding on to so much guilt. Like, I looked at a text, and when I looked up, she was gone. Had I not looked at that text, so she was holding on to it. When she understood that the whole thing was pre-planned and organized as a spiritual lesson and a spiritual journey, she let go of that guilt. I want Vladdy's got a great question here. Albert has arranged a few meetings with otherworldly beings, just a few, for you. Has he also shown you your higher self? Great question, Vladdy.
Yeah, no, he hasn't. And I don't know the reason for it. I mean, he's introduced me to one of my other spirit guides, and a lady named Alina. He says I have other guides that he won't introduce me to, or won't give me their names. So he has his reasons, but he's left that alone. And I know that I work with the higher self a lot when I do my QHHT sessions. I contact the client's higher self, so I work with that a lot. But I have not met my own higher self. Maybe because they don't want to meet me. I don't know.
You got a lot going on. I forgot to tell people during the bio that so Garnet contacts. So Albert contacts Garnet. When it's convenient for Albert to write another book, and then he didn't for a while, and you said to him, what am I going to, because you were retired, what am I going to do with my life now that you're not coming to show me, stuff to write books? And he said, go and do QHHT. So you now practice as a QHHT practitioner, which stands for Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique.
Exactly.
And taking people into hypnosis so that they can gain sort of more access to their spirit guides, access to their higher selves, access to past lives. So you've been doing that for what, about 4 or 5 years now, Garnet?
Oh, more, since 2017.
Really? That long? Wow.
Yeah. It's been. I'm surprised when I look back at when I actually did start, and it's been that long. But it's been a great journey, and I've done a lot of sessions, and they're really quite satisfying and fulfilling to me, because I like to help people connect with their higher self. That's where you really get your answers, and it's really quite an amazing experience. And so many people, I'm really happy when they come away from the session saying, "Well, that was great. I've got a new lease on life. I'm going off in the right direction now," and it just makes them happy. And so it's really a great practice to have.
Have you ever had any trouble getting people to an altered awareness, or let me say a deeper awareness, where they can access that information? Has anyone ever not been able to do that in a session, or have they all got there?
Yeah, no. There's a small minority of people who won't be hypnotized, who can't or don't want to be hypnotized, even though they say they want to be. So the whole thing is you have to be hypnotized, which is what I do with my clients, into the theta level, the deepest level of hypnosis, and that's where you can make the contact. Otherwise, you really can't. And there's a small percentage of people. Dolores Cannon, who invented the whole process, she did like thousands of sessions. She said there's probably maybe 10% of the people in the world who can't be hypnotized or won't be hypnotized. So with those people, when I've had a few of them, it doesn't work. It's just not there, and there's not much you can do about it. And the correlation is that people who spend most of their time on the left side of their brain, left brain people, left side is logic, analysis, judgment, science, that kind of thing. They're the toughest ones to hypnotize. People who spend most of the time on the right side, which is creativity and artists, musicians, and that, they're much more easily hypnotized. So the people who have not been able to hypnotize are really strong left brain control freaks, and they're afraid of letting go. They think if they're hypnotized that they'll lose all control, and they don't want that. So they refuse.
I know. I had a client recently that I don't practice QHHT, but I'm able to take people very easily to a state where they can access spiritual guidance and their spirit guides. And he said, has it never not happened for you? And I said, never not happened. And I couldn't get him there. And I was so frustrated. I've got to get him back because I'm determined to get him there. I'm going to get him back and make it happen because, we had like a 4-hour session. And when he left, we had a great session. It was a great and profound session. But when he left, because I couldn't take him to that place, I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? How can I do it better next time? It sort of challenged me. But you once revealed to me, Garnet, that you were one of those people, that you had a session or two and you didn't go under either.
Yeah, I had a couple of sessions and I was able to get into a light trance, and I had a past life regression. And it was very real to me because I got very emotional in them. In one case, it was, I was a Native American woman, and my husband was off fighting the cavalry. He came back, he was wounded, and he basically died in my arms. And during the session, there was tears running down my cheeks. So I was really back there in that past life. But I couldn't connect, or they couldn't connect with my higher self, which is really disappointing because I had a whole bunch of nice questions, and it didn't work. So anyway, I'm very much of a left brain person, I think, is the problem. But anyway, so that was my experience, but I've had really good experience with other clients, except for the odd occasion. So I've often thought about doing another session with somebody when I thought, just wasting that person's time, because it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I had one client who went into a past life, again, an American Indian past life. I've had so many lives as an American Indian. No coincidence that my clients have too. And he said that the experience for him, and it was just over, Zoom, it was like being there again. And he had a best friend in this life who was a best friend in that life too, and he saw their relationship in that life. And it was just really profound for him, but he just couldn't get over how real it was. It was like being in a virtual, like the holodeck on Star Trek. It's like being there and you're sitting in a chair. Yeah, I love that. Is that what it felt like for you as well?
Yeah, it's very real. It was actually very, very real. Like I was reliving parts of that life, which is really, it actually, I was surprised because I didn't know quite how it would work out, but it was very real. And the practitioner was very skilled. Wasn't her fault at all. But just me. But anyway, the past life was rewarding, and I really thought, okay, well, that's at least I sort of understand some of what my clients are going through.
Yeah. Now I'm going to do a station ID break. You're listening to ATP Media, Accentuate the Positive with Karen Swain, awakening and expanding consciousness on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3 FM, syndicated radio all over the place. My guest today is Garnet Schulhauser, who is an amazing being, once a corporate lawyer, now has his marching orders with his spirit guide, Albert, to fly around the universe and witness many things and write about them in books. He's written 5 books in the spiritual metaphysical genre. And we are kind of discussing the latest book today, which is Dancing with Angels in Heaven. And the first part of that book is an orientation class with humans coming to Earth. And I guess it's almost half the book, really, where the class just goes on and on and on. And you discuss many things. And I wanted to ask you, so we talked about the wheel of karma and not being trapped on Earth. You also talk about there's no hell and that this is not a prison planet. And you also talked about, or they talked about in the orientation class, that God does not answer our prayers, and the effects of climate change and the 10 commandments, not from source. There was a lot of things that happened in the orientation class that go directly against a lot of religious dogma. And I'm wondering, have you had nasty letters from religious people saying, you're wrong? Have people reached out to you about? Yes?
Yeah, I've had a lot of very negative, negative emails and messages on, under my YouTube channels and so on.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of them just say, you're going to hell, buddy. You're blasphemy. You're going to go to hell. You're a terrible person. It goes on and on. Different people say different things, but it just water off a duck's back. I expected that. I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's entitled to believe whatever they want to believe. And I was raised in a very religious family. Yeah. And I still have 3 sisters who are still practice the Roman Catholic faith, and they have sort of accepted me. Initially I thought maybe they would shun me, but they haven't. So it's I do get a lot of criticism, but I get a lot more people encouraging me with emails and saying, great job, good for you to do that. I'm glad you had the courage to write your books. And so that really makes up for everything. And I just ignore the negative ones. I mean, I know people are going to believe whatever they want to believe. What I say to people who disagree with what I've said or what Albert has told me is, I said, at the end of the day, when we're both dead, we'll both know who was telling the truth. And in the meantime, you can believe whatever you want, because no matter what you believe, you're still going to end up in the same place as everyone else. And so your belief does not dictate where you go after you die. Everyone goes back to the same place. And you can believe that or not believe that, entirely up to you.
Yeah, exactly. And we're afforded the availability to believe whatever we want to believe and create whatever experience we want to create here on Earth, be it positive or negative. You can create heaven or hell according to what you believe. You can create prison or freedom according to what you believe. And we're afforded that luxury to do that, because I think that on the spirit side, we don't have that luxury. So we come here to create that. But I wanted to go into God does not answer your prayers. Do you want to talk about that, when they talked about how God does not answer your prayers?
Yeah, well, in my religion, of course, everyone will be praying all the time. If you want to pass your final exam, you pray to God. If you want to get over an illness, you pray to God. If you want a job promotion, you pray to God. I mean, that was pretty standard. Yeah. What Albert says is that God, or the source, I like to refer to the creator as the source, doesn't manipulate events on our planet. So the source sort of basically has created all this stuff and created souls who can go to journey and incarnate on planet Earth. He doesn't make any rules for them. It's sort of like, okay, you have free will. You can do whatever you want. No matter what you do, whether it's good or bad, you're going to end up back on the spirit side, and you can regroup and try again. So given the fact that God does not manipulate events, doesn't control things, it means that if you pray to God to do something, it's not going to help you any, because God does not listen to a prayer, decide to answer it or not answer it, and then do things to help you or not help you. The source just doesn't get involved in that. But prayers are thoughts, and thoughts are waves of energy that fan out and affect other matter and energy in the universe. So a prayer is not totally ineffective. A prayer is a thought which can actually, if enough people are praying about the same thing and thinking about the same thing, they can actually manipulate matter to some degree. So prayers can help you in some way, but it's not God sitting on a throne in the sky who listens to your prayer and says, okay, well, you're a pretty good guy, so I'm going to grant your wish. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I concur with that. A lot of what you've written in this book, my spirit guides have shown me that same thing. And there have been other books that have been written which collaborate with some of the experiences that you write about. And but you don't read other people's books, right? I think Albert said to you not to read other people's books so that you don't get that information mixed up. He just is going to show you what you need to know.
Yeah, I don't read those spiritual books because of Albert said, yeah, but it'll just sort of cloud my perception of what he's telling me. And the trouble is that if you read a 10 books that say this is the case, and Albert's telling me something else is the case, I may be reluctant to go against the grain, go against the crowd. So he says, don't bother reading any of those books. You write about what I tell you, and that's all you should be paying attention to. So don't bother yourself trying to read other books and trying to figure out, well, is that person right? Am I wrong? Who's telling the truth here? So it's just a basic way of keeping my mental acuity clear of all the other conflicting thoughts out there. And there's lots of conflicting thoughts. I mean, you mentioned all the people who write books about the prison planet, and you're trapped in the wheel of karma, and all those sort of things. And I just don't need to fill my head with that stuff, so I don't read any of that.
Yeah, fair enough. So another one of the things that you talk about, or they talk about on the orientation class, is the 10 Commandments, like Moses. In one of the other books that I've read, the Tayuba Prophecy, it talks about Moses and Jesus coming from a highly evolved, another planet. They're like basically ETs or highly evolved beings. You don't actually say that verbatim, but you say that they're highly evolved beings who incarnated into this earth to help humanity. And you say in the book, or the orientation class says, that the 10 Commandments were rules constructed by Moses to help organize humanity, but they weren't commandments that came from God. Again, going against the biblical teaching.
That's right, yeah. And in fact, my understanding is that he came up with Moses was a very advanced soul. He came to help humanity. Thought that, the feeling was humanity was sort of off on the wrong track, and he needed some guidance.
Right.
And so he came up with the 10 Commandments in a deep meditation, and so then he told the people, of course, to have more force. If he said, "Guess what? I just came up with 10 Commandments. What do you think?" So he said these 10 Commandments came from God, a superior being, and so that gave them a lot more force and effect. And so that's how they evolved. But they didn't come from the source. They came from Moses in a deep meditation.
Yeah. Look, I understand what he's talking about. I remember I had a client once and I said a whole lot of stuff to her, but I said it as me. And then she went and had this 15-minute session with a person who said that she was channeling some higher consciousness, who charged her like $250 for a 15-minute session. And I said to her, what did she say? And she said exactly the same thing that I had said, but it had come from this higher entity channeled through this being. And it had more, like the message had more weight when it came from this higher source, that it was channeled through this woman rather than just this, human me. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, isn't it, how that works? Yeah, like where you say you're getting your information from. Yeah, we're all getting it from the same source, I think, most of us as spiritual beings. All right, moving on. The New Earth, fascinating chapter, and something that you've said in this book, which, or Albert said, I think, which is something that a lot of people talk about, that this Earth School was a human experiment, like it was an experiment. Do you remember writing that?
Yeah, it was an experiment, and unfortunately the experiment didn't turn out quite the way they had hoped to, because we ended up with a bunch of negative emotions, and negative emotions cause all the problems, all the murders and the mass killings and the genocide and everything else in our planet. Negative emotions like anger, fear, hate, greed, those things are sort of overwhelming a lot of people on our planet, and they cause a lot of the grief, especially for people who are in a position of power, the leaders of the various countries or the leaders of the cartels and whatever. And so what was really amazing was in the New Earth, they had there's no negative emotions, so everything, the vibration level is so high that there's no negative emotions, so just love and forgiveness and compassion. So that's why it was such a great place. and the vibrations on the new Earth are very much higher than Earth. It's still a physical dimension, but the vibrations are very much higher than here. So it's a wonderful place, and people from the old Earth have ascended to the new Earth. They've been doing it over the years, and they're still doing it. And the trick to get to the new Earth, which is you can just imagine a place where there's nothing but love and forgiveness and compassion. What a wonderful place that is. Humans here on the old Earth can get there, but we have to raise our vibrations to match the vibration rate of the new Earth. And the way to do that, which is much easier said than done, is by fully embracing love, compassion, forgiveness, and trying to stifle and discard our negative emotions. Because as humans, we all have negative emotions. I mean, we flare up with anger. We are jealous about our neighbor having things that we don't have. All those negative things. That's just part and parcel of humans as they are on the old Earth, and it's difficult to get rid of that. But if we can just pop up to the new Earth. And Albert described it this way. He said, imagine if you hold a cork underwater and then release it, it just pops up to the surface. Well, once your vibrations match the vibrations of the new Earth, you'll just pop up there, and away you go. And there's interesting, and I detailed this in one of my books. I met a soul on the spirit side who had actually ascended to the new Earth. And what happened was that she was a lady who was happily married with, loved her husband, 2 lovely young kids. And then one day tragedy struck, and a drunk driver T-boned her husband and kids and killed them all. So she spiraled down into the depths of despair and then anger. And she was angry at everybody and angry at the world. And then she became very depressed. And at one point was considering committing suicide. And then a friend of hers said, well, okay, before you do that, why don't you go to an ashram in India and see if they can help you? So she thought, okay, I have nothing to lose. So she went to this ashram in India, learned to meditate. Took a long time, but she began to meditate, became better at it all the time with the guidance of the people in the ashram. And eventually she learned to forgive the driver who killed her family. And then she learned to forgive God, because she had been blaming God the whole time for, why did you let this happen, God? I was having a very good life and I didn't deserve any of this. So she learned to forgive God. Then one day she was sitting in the garden outside this ashram, and in a very deep meditation, when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the ashram. She had ascended to the new Earth. So it was really quite amazing, an amazing story. And so she, in the new Earth, of course, it's still a physical plane. So human bodies there do die, but they live for a couple hundred years, so much longer than Earth. So she had come back from her new incarnation in the new Earth, and she was on the spirit side. And I said to her, so if you decide to incarnate, are you going to incarnate back into the new Earth, which souls can do that? She said no, she was going to incarnate back into the old Earth so she could help people on the old Earth raise their vibrations. So it was a very, very noble sort of statement, and she was very genuine about that.
Forgot to unmute myself. I know you went over that story in the latest book, and I had a bit of an epiphany rereading it, because in the last conversation I had with you on the show, Garnet, we spoke about, well, how do people who are high vibrational teachers stay here on Earth and not pop up to the new Earth? How do they not ascend if they're all love and light? And you said to me, oh, I don't know about that. And I had this analogy given to me, like when you're diving in the ocean, in order to stay under the water, you have to wear weight belts, right? And when you take your weight belt off, you pop up. It's a bit like talking about the new Earth. Maybe higher souls who incarnate into the denser planes need to wear a weight belt so they carry a certain amount of negative emotion to sort of keep them here without popping up to the new Earth or popping out of this dimension. So they're sort of carrying this weight belt purposely to keep them here. What do you think about that analogy?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, Karen. And they definitely have to lower their vibrations if they want to incarnate into the old Earth. And they have some way of doing that. Your analogy is great, like putting on a weight belt. But they do that very deliberately, very consciously. They could go back to the new Earth, but some of them just say, no, I'm going to help those poor souls on old Earth, try to better their lives and raise their vibrations. And So good for them, good for those souls.
Yeah. So sometimes when you think you're a love and light soul and you hit those negative emotions, you can think, oh, that's just my weight belt talking.
That's good. I'm gonna remember that.
You like that one? Well, my daughter's a diver, so they gave me the analogy of the weight belt. All right, the council. Well, this has gone so quickly. We've only got half an hour less, and I've got a million more things I want to talk about. The Council of Wise Ones. So when you first went to the spirit side with Albert, you've been to places where people go when they leave their physical incarnation and they get orientated back on the spirit side. You've been to a city that you called a gladiator on the spirit side where people can wear different identities that they've been in different lives. And you've seen Elvis and the Beatles and Muhammad and Jesus and everybody. But the Council of Wise Ones, I was thinking about this morning, are they only... okay, they're answering my question as I'm asking it, but I'm going to ask you, are they only spirit, or are they made up of spirit guides and ET consciousness, so beings that are still having some sort of physical incarnation, maybe on other planets, highly evolved physical incarnations?
Yeah, I don't know about that. My information is that they were very advanced souls who obviously had a number of incarnations on planet Earth. You need to do that to have the experience, because one of their functions is to provide counseling and advice to souls who are about to incarnate in terms of what they put into their life plan. So you get guidance, So some people will say, I'm going to have this life be born in a wealthy family, no problems. The Council of Wise Ones may say, well, you're not really giving yourself enough challenges there. Why don't you maybe insert something else in here into your life to make it more challenging, where you can learn more? So that's just advice. And then there are people who bite off more than they can chew, who say, well, I'm going to go into this life on planet Earth, and I'm going to set up a whole bunch of very difficult challenges. The council may say, given your history in terms of incarnations and your point of advancement, you're maybe biting off more than you can chew, and maybe you're making it too difficult. And if you make a life too difficult, then you're not going to learn as much as with a more even-keeled kind of life. So they give souls advice, and that's one of their main functions, is to advise souls about, are you choosing the right life on Earth? Should you adjust it, here and there, tweak it? And so they're all souls who've had many incarnations, so they know what it's like to incarnate on planet Earth, and so they're a very great source of information. And so they basically oversee all the incarnations on planet Earth, whether it's a incarnation into an animal or a human. And so their guidance is very much appreciated and prized, and that's really their function. Don't know if they have incarnations on other planets. That's never came across to me. So I'm just telling you what I'm aware of.
Well, as I asked that question, my guide said to me, yeah, some of them are still active incarnations on other planets. And I said, oh, okay, cool. But because I asked that question because a lot of people who get guidance from these highly evolved beings that are in galactic councils, like my guides have said to me too, that I sit on a galactic council who oversees the starseeds to come into this, like people that elect to come here that have had lives on other planets and they're here specifically for the shift. Yeah, sure, I'll come to Earth and take on a human life, and I'll work as a healer or a psychic or something and help evolve human life like the starseeds. So they've shown me that I sort of sit in the spirit side on this galactic council with other highly evolved souls that are still currently incarnated in galactic lives, like Palladians, Arcturians, whatever, like that. So I wondered if that council exists of those people as well.
Yeah, I don't have any information about that. It would not surprise me. I mean, in fact, there's nothing that I've learned with Albert that has surprised me at all. I mean, it's like, and I've only touched the surface, so I'm quite open about that.
I want to go into someone that you did meet, because more of the stories out there on the internet, the reptilians get a bad rap, and you went to a planet that was inhabited by reptilian beings. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was, and we met this being there. Her name was Sobek, and she looked quite a bit like an alligator, but she was very advanced, very intelligent. We communicated by telepathy, and one of the interesting, and she was very peaceful, very non-aggressive, and they were the dominant species of that planet, these alligator-like creatures. And one of the interesting things was that they had learned to gain all of the nutrients that they need to sustain their life. They didn't need to eat solid food or drink water. They got all their energy from their sun. They had learned to convert their sun's rays into nutrients that they could absorb in their body and sustain them. So they were basically totally vegetarian. She looked actually very menacing. She looked like like an alligator with a big jaw. And I thought, when I was first there, even though I was an astroform, I thought, oh, are we going to get into trouble with her? But Albert was there with me, so I was pretty comfortable that wouldn't happen. But very intelligent being, and nothing. They had no desire to travel to other planets to imprison people. So the rap that these so-called reptilians get, and I don't know where they come from, where that notion comes from, was not this person at all or her race. They were very peace-loving, very intelligent, very developed, and they were very peaceful. So that's my experience with reptilians.
Yeah, that's your experience. I'm sure that other people have had, other experiences with reptilians, because there's, infinite experiences that we can have. But again, another friend of Albert's, because when you went down in your astral form and this alligator being saw Albert's like, oh, hi, Albert, how are you? Good to see you again. I'm like, God, Albert knows all these beings across the universe. So not only were they not going to eat you, they weren't going to eat anything because they didn't eat food. So they were breatharians. You go into the technology a little bit in the book, but you don't reveal exactly what happens, because I think you asked Albert that, can we take this technology back to Earth? And Albert said, no, not for Earth at this time. But there are beings, and I've had people on the show who call themselves breatharians, or they don't ingest food and living on light. So they just live on the conscious light of their own soul, which sustains their body. So that actually does happen here on Earth, which is interesting.
Interesting. I have not run into any of them, but I'd sure like to meet one.
Yeah, well, I can introduce you to one.
Okay.
Yeah, Jazz Maheen, she's Australian. She lives in Queensland. And light energy from the sun. Yeah, he said that he transformed the light energy from the sun into the body. They had some sort of technology. They pass it through a crystal. That was interesting. Whereas Jazz Maheen just passes it, the light energy from the sun, or the energy from source, just sustains her body completely, living on light, or living on prana, she calls it. All right, what have we got left? About 20 minutes left. I think one of my favorite chapters in the book was Area 51. So you get to ask Albert, after several books of Albert's agenda just being given to you. In this latest book, you get to ask Albert about things that you were curious about, and he answers your questions. One of them is Area 51. Do you want to tell people what you saw?
Yeah, he took me to Area 51, again, traveling astrally. So we just slipped through the doors in the ground. It's all underground, of course. So big, huge cavern. And he took me to this one building where the spacecraft that is famous for the Roswell crash in 1948, that spacecraft was there, and it was it was on display, and the bodies of of two of the occupants of that craft were there in sort of a preservative liquid, and you could see them. So I mean, what happened actually was that he explained it to me, and I actually saw the actual crash in the Akashic records. Was that this was a scout craft. The main mothership was hidden on the other side of the sun. The scout craft had an anomaly, a malfunction, and they crashed into a weather balloon, and that caused further disruption. And they ended up crashing in the desert there by Roswell. And the army came, and they pulled the occupants out. There was one of the little occupants was still living. The other two were dead. And he described these little, they're sort of like little gray creatures, and he said they were kind of like artificial, robots, sort of that they had created to run the spacecraft. But
Android.
Android. That's the word I'm looking for. Androids. Yeah, they were androids, so they took this craft back to the base. Some people actually saw the craft and the crash, and of course the government just disavowed that. Said no, that was just a weather balloon. And so they went back to this army the Roswell Army airfield. and they tried to save the one little guy who was still alive, but they couldn't. And the other two were dead. And so they took the craft from there, went to Andrews Air Force Base in California, eventually ended up in Area 51. It's still there. And Albert said that our scientists have not been able to figure out what made it tick. So they couldn't figure out how the avionics worked or how the propulsion system worked. And they couldn't really do anything. The body of the craft was so hard, like way harder than titanium, that they couldn't really crack into it. And so it's still there. And obviously our scientists would love to be able to figure out how it works and make their own craft, but they haven't done that yet. So that was one of the big things about Area 51. The other place he took me to was a CIA experiment where they were trying to work a system where they could train soldiers to travel to the spirit side. In other words, euthanize them. And then they hoped that those souls in that spirit side would then spy for them against Russia and China and whoever, and communicate what they found back to the people on Earth. Except that didn't work because the good people on the spirit side said, no, we're not going to let that happen. And so it didn't work, but they were trying. That was one of the things they tried to do.
There's a whole Netflix series about that. There's this mad scientist who is trying to kill people so that they can access the spirit side. It's called OA, and it stands for Original Angel. I just watched the second season recently because I watched it years ago and I saw it on Netflix, and I remember thinking, did I enjoy that? I can't remember if I enjoyed that or not, because like anything, there's some.
What is the name of that show, Karen? I'm not familiar with it.
OA.
OA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll have to watch it. Look for it.
Which stands for Original Angel. There's 2 seasons. There's a lot to watch. But I watched the second season recently, and this mad scientist is killing people. He's drowning them so that they go to the spirit side and get information, and then he brings them back. There's actually a few movies out there with that theme, actually. And I think to myself, God, you don't have to kill people to access the spirit side. Mediums are doing it all the time. You don't have to kill people. Yeah, it's just really interesting. Leah says, hello, dear Karen and Garnet. Hey, Leah. That part did surprise me as well, to be honest. Which part's that, Vladdy, that you're talking about that surprised you? What was I going? Area 51. How big was the scout craft? How big was it?
It was about, it was a disc. It was about 50 feet across and maybe 20 feet in the center, the diameter. So it wasn't very big. It was just a scout craft. But it was, they used that to basically leave from the mothership and scout things on planet Earth. And unfortunately, they had an accident. So, that was just, and unfortunately, the little androids didn't make it. But they can manufacture more. I mean, it was, what Albert told me was that those little androids did not have souls. They were
not have souls. Yeah, they didn't have souls.
They were just sort of like a flesh and blood robot kind of thing that they manufactured to run these scout crafts, but they had physical attributes not too different from humans.
Right.
So that's why the doctors were trying to cure it, fix it up after the crash, but they couldn't do it. So anyway, it's unfortunate. It would have been nice to be able to have one of those alive and talk to it and get some information. But I'm afraid that if the little guy had lived, that the parent ship probably would have shut it down, because they wouldn't want, back in, and they still don't want people to know about, the ETs that monitor the Earth. I mean, all this stuff about UFOs, and people say that they're alien aircraft. Well, they are, but the government's been trying to shut that down, that disclosure, for ever since day one, and they still don't want that disclosure to be there. But eventually, that will all come out, and eventually they will drop down on the front lawn of the White House and say, "Hi, here we are."
Well, wouldn't it be fascinating if they dug that thing up and they put it, they said, "Look, we found this in 1947. Check it out." But I was thinking about this morning, about how they couldn't find out how to operate the vehicle. I think that maybe they have now. Mind you, you were there only a few years ago in your astral form, but most of the vehicles are operated, because I was having a chat with my guides about this morning. Most of the vehicles, craft, are operated telepathically through consciousness. And the little ET androids, and they don't have souls. So I'm asking my guides this morning, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, okay, if you're operating the vehicle through consciousness and the little androids don't have a soul, then how are they operating the vehicle? And the guide said to me, well, you can flow consciousness through anything. You can flow consciousness through a computer or a toaster or a car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the toaster has a soul or the car has a soul. And I said, oh, okay. So you're flowing consciousness through the androids, and then they're connecting to the consciousness of the craft, and
Mm-hmm.
together they're operating. So that was interesting little conversation this morning with the mob about how this operates. But I think that you saw also in Area 51, you know, the experiments they were doing with consciousness. I think they figured out that the craft is driven through consciousness now, right? They didn't years ago, but now
I don't know what their current thinking is, but they haven't been able to figure out how to operate it.
Right.
Obviously, they'd love to be able to duplicate it, and you can imagine if one country had a craft so advanced like that, it would just take over the world. And so that hasn't happened.
No, well, there's a lot of whistleblowers out there. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze. 1 sec. Oh, there you go. A lot of whistleblowers out there saying that there is back-engineered technology that they can drive around, that back-engineered from craft like that, that they have figured out how to use it. But anyway, that's all coming out now through Congress and stuff. That's all coming out. What's Caroline say here? I wonder if the occupants on board the mothership are still around, and if they don't come back to collect. I wonder. This is a good question, Caroline. And if they don't come back to collect it, wonder why the little ship is still in Area 51. Maybe they deliberately crashed it so that we would gain this knowledge, that humanity would gain this knowledge. What do you think about that, Garnet?
Possibly. My information from Albert was that it was just a malfunction, but maybe he's just giving me the party line. I don't know. So that's possible. I don't really know. And he said that the mothership didn't come to collect the craft because they didn't want to appear to the humans. So in other words, I said, when it crashed in near Roswell, why didn't they come and pick it up and take it back to the mothership? And he said, well, they didn't want to expose the mothership, which apparently is quite big, to the people there. So they just sort of said, okay, fine, we'll know that humans will just cover it up, and so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Well, you did contact a ship. Oh, we're running out of time. You did contact a ship that was hovering, that was traversing, hovering around Earth. Was it a Palladian? Then you went up on the ship. I can't remember what that was now. I can't remember which book that is in. But do you remember that story of going up to a ship and contacting some ETs that were hovering around Earth?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it was a ship that was in orbit. Albert took me there. We just sort of traveling astrally. We just floated through the walls of the ship. There was a whole bunch of I'd call them grays. They were humanoid. I think they were probably about 3 feet tall. I don't know if they were the same ones as those androids on the other that we talked about. But they've been monitoring. Their race has been monitoring planet Earth for eons. They've been watching what's going on. They're just one of many races that have been watching us. Albert says they're all friendly. They're not here to enslave the Earth or to conquer us or anything. He said if their technology is so advanced, if they wanted to enslave us, they could have done so long ago. So they're here to help us. They try to encourage us to develop. And the reason that they can't just sort of give us the silver bullet on a platter is because they're under this. It's the Star Trek Prime Directive. They're not allowed to interfere unduly with the affairs of a primitive society, which is what we are compared to them. So they can't just sort of interfere. What I said, why wouldn't they just destroy all of our weapons? Our nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. Why wouldn't they just destroy that? Take away all of our weapons, so we'd be happier. And because of that, the Prime Directive, they cannot do that. So they have to let us develop on our own. And they sit there and they, obviously shudder every time we have a war or a conflict. But they have to sort of just stand there and watch us. But they're on our side. They really want us to succeed. They know that we're having a rough time, and they really want us to get over this rough patch that we're going through, so we don't destroy ourselves. But it was very enlightening, and they basically said, yeah, you guys have a lot of problems. We're watching. We try to help you when we can. They send intuitive thoughts to people on Earth, like to inventors, about inventing things that can help improve our lifestyle. And they've been doing that, but they can't just sort of appear down and say, okay, guess what? we're getting rid of all your problems. We have to get rid of our problems ourselves. That's just part of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So this is when people say they contact galactic councils and stuff, they're talking, thanks, Caroline, they're talking to these highly evolved ET races that are overseeing the evolution on planet Earth. And Caroline says, thank you, Garnet, for all the work that you do and the messages that you bring. She actually has, you'll have to have him on your show. Oh, he did say to me that he's sick of doing podcast shows, but he'd come back on mine because I've had him on so many times. But Caroline also has a podcast show on the network, on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And she asked me to come on her show, a great show as well. She says, thank you, Karen. You are most welcome. You'll have to read the books, Caroline. They'll blow your mind. I just love them. Okay, before we go, a couple more things in the latest book. And Albert has come back to Garnet. This was a question I was going to ask. Is there another book in the pipeline? And Garnet was telling me there is. There is more to come. So book 6 will come out one day when he gets unties the piano that's tied around his ass.
And there's quite an intricate knot on that piano, so I don't know. I have to work at it.
He's not as enthusiastic about doing it as he was 10 years ago when the phenomena first happening. He'd become very blasé about all this stuff, Garnet. People listening that have never heard this stuff are like, whoa, is this real? And you're like, yeah, just another day in the cosmos. Anyway, Loch Ness Monster, Nessie. Do you want to tell us what you heard? One of your questions.
One of the things I was curious about, and when Albert gave me this opening to ask him questions that I was curious about, that was one of the things I said, does Nessie exist? And he said, yes. It's the remains of a prehistoric dinosaur-like creature that had existed at the time of the dinosaurs, and the ancestors to the current Nessie moved into the Loch Ness when it was open to the North Sea, and their descendants have been living there in Loch Ness ever since the dinosaurs were around. And so it is a real life creature. It's actually more than one, and they do multiply, but they're very good about keeping out of sight from humans. So they've been sighted occasionally, but they're kind of much like the Sasquatch. They don't want to have any open contact with humans, because if they did, they'd be put in a zoo somewhere. And so they like their freedom. They like how they live right now. They're close to nature, and they just avoid humans at all costs. And frankly, I don't blame them. But anyway, yeah, they do exist, and they're basically derived from a dinosaur-like creature way back in the time of the dinosaurs.
But how cool is that we still have dinosaurs here on Earth? You know, when that movie Jurassic Park first came out, my daughter was a kid. She's in her 30s now. I remember the scene where he recreated the dinosaurs through finding a fossil and taking the DNA, and you know, and I'm thinking, I bet that's been done somewhere in the world. I bet that this is not fantasy. I bet that that's been done somewhere in the world. But
absolutely,
it's so cool to think that dinosaurs are still here. That's amazing.
The other interesting thing, and I described this in one of my books, is that there's a number of parallel universes. You're aware of that, of course.
Yeah.
Earth exists in a number of parallel universes. Albert tells me that in one universe, the asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula and knocked off all of our dinosaurs missed that Earth by a fraction. The dinosaurs are still the dominant species on that Earth. It was really interesting. So they do exist. And you're right. I think that our scientists at some point, maybe they have already, they'll be able to basically clone from dinosaur fossils and DNA. We can have the dinosaurs back again, which is good and bad, I guess. I mean, if they're kept in a zoo, not so good, but if they're allowed to sort of be free somewhere, I think that's fine.
Yeah. Well, that's been discussed in Hollywood movies many times through the Jurassic Park movies. Okay, but the parallel universe, at the end of the book, I think you go into the parallel universe. That's a whole show on itself. You know, what happens in parallel universes. You also touch on it in one of your other books where you go over that story again in this book, where you go to a parallel universe in Earth, and you ask Albert, am I here? And do you want to tell people what he said to you about you being in that parallel universe?
Yeah. He said I exist in other parallel universes, but I said, well, can I meet myself? And he said, no, that wouldn't be a good idea. So he wasn't going to introduce me. but he did say I did have other clones. I call them clones, and I'm sure that you probably have some clones. Every time the universe splits, the people living there basically end up with a clone, and we're not aware of that. And you mentioned before, it's all part of the same soul. So if I'm cloned, my soul splits into 2 or 3 or 10 or however many it is, and we're not aware of the other clones. But at the end of the day, when we all go back to the spirit side, we all sort of regroup and consolidate again. And instead of having just one life review for one existence on one universe, we get to see all of them. And so it's really quite a sort of accelerated learning experience.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things that occurred to me is that, I've often wondered, when I look back at my life and I come to a decision point, a fork in the road, and I've chosen the left fork, and I wonder if there's my clone somewhere who chose the other fork, and what would have happened. Very interesting. But of course, we're not allowed to see that now. We will see it when we get back to the spirit side.
Yeah, it makes the life review much more complicated when we're reviewing not just this life, we're reviewing all our parallel lives, and we might be even reviewing, how our past lives dovetailed with our current life and our parallel lives, and maybe even how our future lives dovetailed with our parallel lives. And it makes it so
it's very complicated. Yes.
Complicated and confusing to our little puny human brains.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
4 minutes to go, Garnet. God, this goes quickly with you. Bermuda Triangle. So you asked him, what's the secret to the Bermuda Triangle? Do you want to share with us what Albert showed you?
Sure. Underneath the seabed of the Bermuda Triangle is a UFO base, basically. And they travel from there. They have a wormhole that they can use to get to other stars. And anyway, there's a lot of energy generated around this. So when they're leaving through the wormhole, the energy basically affects electronics, and you hear all the stories about planes going into the Bermuda Triangle, and then their instruments go wacky and they end up disappearing. That's just a side effect of the UFOs, using this wormhole to go to other star systems. So it's a base underneath the sea. We're not aware of it, and they keep it very well hidden. But that's why there's such an anomaly around the Bermuda Triangle. It's this UFO base that they use to enter a wormhole to go to other star systems.
Oh, Vladdy's saying thank you. Yeah, this has been an amazing show, and we've come to the end. Unfortunately, I just want to share with people Garnet's books again. They will rock your world, blow your mind. They'll definitely enlighten you. They'll definitely make you more aware of what happens across the universe that maybe you weren't aware of. Dancing on a Stamp, dancing. Everybody's dancing. We're dancing throughout the cosmos, forever in spirit. We're dancing in heaven, and we're dancing with angels in heaven. And if you want to support the show, I have all the Amazon links on my page, which is a link under the YouTube and Facebook and Rumble. If you click on that, you'll see more information from Garnet and all the books there. Their books are published by Ozark Mountain Press, which was Dolores Cannon's, or is Dolores Cannon's. Just because she's not in her physical body anymore doesn't mean she's not still overseeing this publishing company. And we've discussed, why you chose that, how it all came about. We discussed in detail in other shows, your transition from a corporate lawyer into being an astral traveler and a spiritual writer. And it was quite a transition from the corporate world to this world. I think I discussed with you at length on some of the first shows all about that. When I asked you about ridicule and judgment from people that are very religious, you were used to it. When you transition from a corporate lawyer into talking about this stuff, it's quite a leap in faith and a leap in going from that conversation to this conversation. Garnet, thank you so much for blessing us again on the show. You said that you've turned down about a dozen podcast shows because you're over it. You've been doing it for how many years now? 15 years? 20 years?
My first show was in 2013, so 15 years, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not over it yet. I've been doing this for about 16 years, still yakking, still talking. But yeah, you're definitely one of my all-time favorite guests because the information that you're sharing with humanity is so vast. Yeah.
Well,
anything you'd like to say?
Thank you for having me on your show. Always a delight to talk to you, Karen. And I'm sure you're going to continue on for quite a bit longer. You're a very young person yet, so you've got a long ways to go.
No, I'm not. I'm just using AI to look younger. You can touch up your appearance on StreamYard. When I first started using StreamYard, you couldn't do that. And now you can. So it takes out my wrinkles, though I'm not that young. And thanks to everybody that have been watching. Thanks, Shirley, and all the gals in Canada, and Caroline, Laddie, and everybody that's been watching online, and for your questions. And we'll catch you again next time. Big love to all of you. Bye for now.
Bye.